On the night of 23rd April 2005 at David Motel in Bossier City, a 30-year-old lady, Tasha Lampkin, went out to a restaurant in the middle of the night to pick up the food she had ordered. On her way back to the motel, two men, Dwight and Brandon Davis, abducted her and took her to a secluded place. They sexually assaulted her twice and robbed her $80. In order to avoid being reported by the woman, they placed her inside the trunk of her car. Tasha pleaded with them not to kill her because she had a little child to take care of. She even promised not to report them, but they refused to hear her plea. They set the car ablaze and burned her alive inside the trunk of her car. Tasha Lampkin died a painful death that she didn't deserve. Truly, some human beings are very wicked. This is the story of Tasha Lampkin. Tasha Marie Lambkin was born on January 23, 1975. She was raised in Houston, in Texas. Growing up, her family didn't have a lot of money, but they loved her so much. Tasha was so close to her cousin, Tanya Douglas, who also happened to be her best friend. At a very young age, Tasha was a very talented girl, and she had a lot of passion in sewing. She taught herself how to use a sewing machine, and she began making her own clothes. She would cut different clothes and fabrics and transform them into beautiful clothes. When Tasha was in high school at the age of 17 years old, she got pregnant and gave birth to a son named Marcus. Tasha loved the boy so much that she considered him as her whole world. Tasha, who was a single mother, worked so hard so that she can provide for her son, who had reached 13 years old. She loved children very much, and so she teamed up with her cousin, Tanya Douglas, and they opened a daycare. The business had a lot of work, but they enjoyed doing them. Because of the hectic schedule of motherhood and running the daycare business, Tasha and her cousin, Tanya, often went to Shreveport in Louisiana to rest and spend time with their family and friends. So on a spring evening of 22nd April 2005, a 30-year-old Tasha Lampkin and her cousin, Tanya Douglas, set out on a fun road trip from Houston in Texas to Shreveport in Louisiana, where they planned to spend the weekend visiting their family and friends. So one of their cousins, a lady known as Renee Farley, rented two cars from a local Hertz. She rented a Camry for herself and a 2005 Nissan Altima car, which she gave to Tasha and Tanya to use on their journey. The journey to Louisiana was roughly 250 miles from Texas, so at around 11 p.m. they arrived at Bossier City, which was just outside Shreveport. After arriving at Bossier, Tasha contacted a man named Donald Bromkin, who lived in the Shreveport area. She met him during one of her trip in Louisiana, and she would occasionally see him, and they would hang out together whenever she visited the town together with her cousin. Unfortunately, Donald had another girlfriend, and they were blessed with a child together. Tasha had tried to reach Donald, but he didn't pick up his call. It was late for them to visit their family, so they checked in to David Motel. Even though it was very late at night, the cousins were able to meet a few of their friends, but a few hours later, they returned to their room at the motel. Tasha and Tanya were very hungry, so they ordered some takeout food from a Waffle House on Old Minden Road, which was just a short drive away. Tasha left the motel room around 3:15 a.m. to pick up the food while Tanya stayed behind. At some point, Tanya fell asleep. Tasha arrived at Waffle House on Old Minden Road at around 3:30 a.m. and picked up her food. On that night, a 21-year-old man, Dwight, was hanging out with his friend, also a 21-year-old man named Brandon Davis. Davis had a long criminal history. At that time, he had been out of jail for just 2 months. He had served 5 years in prison for robbing and intimidating a 75-year-old woman. The two had a small, mid-1990s model 2-door Toyota Tercel red car. Unfortunately, the car's frame had been damaged. They saw Tasha leaving the Waffle House, and they followed her to the David Motel. Davis then forced himself into the passenger seat of Tasha's car, and he pulled a gun on her. He told Tasha to follow the red car which Dwight was driving. After reaching at a secluded area, the two sexually assaulted Tasha Lampkin. They then forced her inside the trunk of her vehicle, and they drove further down onto Coon Road in northern Caddo Parish. While there, they got her out of the trunk of her car, and they sexually assaulted her again. They took the money which she had, and they put her back inside the trunk of her car. Davis became nervous, and he told his accomplice, Dwight, that the lady would identify them and their plate number. So they decided to kill her. While inside the trunk of the vehicle, screaming and crying, Tosha begged for her life. She told them that she was a mother, and she promised them that she would not tell anyone about the incident that happened. However, they didn't listen to her plea, so Dwight shot the car fuel tank and the vehicle exploded into flames, with Tosha locked in the trunk of her burning vehicle. The two fled away with about $80, which they stole from her. At around 6 a.m. in the morning, Caddo Parish Fire Department got a call about a car fire on Cunn Road. When firefighters arrived at the scene, they found the vehicle fully engulfed in flames. The firefighters put out the fire, but the flames were so hot that the trunk of the car had melted away. When they looked inside the trunk, they found a badly burned body lying on its right side, with its head facing the driver's side. The body had been burned beyond recognition. They couldn't tell the race or the sex of the victim. Once the body was discovered, the local police were called to the scene, and when they arrived, they observed the body inside the trunk. The police immediately began their investigations. They discovered 2 bullet holes at the side of the vehicle near the fuel filler. They also found shell casings nearby, and immediately they concluded that the bullets were fired at the vehicle fuel tank to set the vehicle ablaze. The police found the license plate of the vehicle badly damaged, but they managed to retrieve the numbers. When the police ran the plate, it came back as a Nissan Altima rental car. They discovered that the car had been rented from a Hertz rental in Houston, Texas. Detectives contacted Hertz Rental and learned that the car had been rented by a woman named Renee Farley. The detectives were able to get in contact with Renee. Once they spoke with her, they discovered that she rented 2 cars, a Camry for herself and a Nissan Altima for 2 of her cousins, that is Tanya Douglas and Tasha Lampkin. Renee told the police that her cousins were staying at the David Motel in Bossier City. She added that Tanya called her that morning, wondering where Tosha went. After speaking to her, the police headed over to the David Motel to speak to Tanya. Meanwhile, at David Motel, on April 23, 2005, around 8 a.m., Tanya woke up and realized that her cousin never came back with the food. It was clear that her bed had not been slept in. She also discovered that the rental car they came with was missing. After discovering that Tosha had not come back, Tanya became worried and she began calling the family around to see if anyone had seen Tosha, but no one had seen her or spoken to her. She had called Renee, but Renee also said that she had not seen Tosha. No one in the family had no idea where she was. After the police arrived at David Motel, they knocked on Tanya's door that morning. Tanya answered the door, and the police officers told her that their rental car had been found burning on the side of the road and there was a body found inside the trunk. Tanya knew immediately that it was her cousin Tosha. The investigators asked Tanya if they could search the motel room. She allowed them, and inside the room they collected Tosha's Texas ID, her toothbrush, and a ticket that she had gotten on the drive from Houston to Shreveport. After speaking to Tanya, they learned that Tosha had left the room to get food from a local restaurant, but she never returned. While at David Motel, investigators noticed that there were surveillance cameras outside, and so they asked the owners for copies of the tapes. They were given the copies of the surveillance footage of that night. Before leaving the motel, detectives spoke to several people, but none of them had seen or heard anything unusual earlier that morning. Tanya also told detectives that she suspects a man named Donald Bromkin to be involved in Tasha's death. Investigators interrogated him concerning Tasha's death since they were friends. He was, however, able to prove to the detectives that he was not around on the night of Tasha's murder, so he was removed from the suspect list. Back at the crime scene, the body was badly burned, and it was impossible to get fingerprints, and so they needed DNA testing to confirm the identity. The car was moved to the storage facility for further examination and testing. Investigators found the key to the trunk which had been left in the lock when the car was set on fire. They also found several gold teeth, one of which had the letter T engraved on it, along with some bobby pins. Due to the condition of the body, It was going to take several weeks before identity could be confirmed, but detectives were convinced that they had found Tasha Lampkin. Later, the DNA results came back, confirming that the body they found in the trunk was Tasha Lampkin. The results from the autopsy confirmed Tasha was alive when that car was set on fire. She had soot in her lungs and carbon monoxide in her liver. The detectives went to the Waffle House where Tasha had went to pick up food at the restaurant. They spoke to a woman who gave them a receipt showing that Tasha had picked up the food on the night of the 23rd. The detectives reviewed the motel's grainy surveillance. They saw the Nissan Altima leave the lot and return shortly after, followed by a small red car. The two cars briefly stopped at the motel, then left at the same time. This red car was pretty distinct. It had two different sets of rims with Ford on the fronts and Toyota on the backs, a missing strip from the side paneling, and a towel in the back window. Police then shared the video footage on local news outlets with hopes that anyone would recognize the red Toyota Tercel. A woman called to say that the red car in the surveillance belonged to her daughter, Lakita Stafford. The police went and talked to Lakita. She informed them that she loaned her car to a 21-year-old man named Dwight Bacon, who agreed that he would fill the car fuel tank. Dwight was visiting his girlfriend on 22nd April at around 9:30 p.m., but unfortunately he was gone all night. The next morning, Dwight Bacon returned with the car. Upon inspecting the car, Lakita found a contact lens case in the back seat with the name Rebecca written on it. She stated that the pink contact lens case in the car didn't belong to her. After news outlets showed a photo of the pink contact case, they received a phone call from a young woman named Rebecca Speed. Rebecca Speed said that at 1 a.m. on the morning Tasha was killed. Rebecca was arriving home to her apartment. As she got out of her car, she was immediately approached by a black male standing near her doorway with a gun. She then ran screaming toward the lobby door to the security guard and luckily was able to get away. However, the assailant had grabbed her purse that contained her pink contact case. After speaking with Lakita, the detectives first tracked down Dwight Bacon at his apartment. They took him to the station for an interrogation. However, Dwight denied having any involvement in Tasha's murder. Detectives refused to believe him because they knew he was driving that unique red car. They also knew that he had someone else with him. Dwight family told the police that Dwight had been associated with a school friend named Brandon Davis. 5 hours later, police tracked down Brandon and they brought him at the station for an interrogation. He denied any involvement in Tasha's murder. He, however, admitted that he was in the red Toyota with Dwight, but it wasn't on the day Tasha was murdered. The police were able to confirm that Brandon was lying because it was only on the day that Tasha was murdered, that was on the 22nd April, that Dwight drove the red car which he was loaned by Lakita. After several more hours of questioning, they both admitted that they were present during Tasha's murder, and they blamed each other. Brandon opened up about what took place. He confessed that he and Dwight had sexually assaulted Tasha twice, robbed her, and burned her to death. Brandon, however, told the police that he wanted to save Tasha, but he was afraid to do so because Dwight was holding a gun, and he would have killed him if he tried to save Tasha. He added that he had no intentions of killing her and that it was just a robbery gone bad. Both Davis and Bacon were arrested and charged with first-degree murder and kidnapping in connection with Tasha's death. They also faced additional charges for alleged carjacking. While in jail, Davis admitted to another inmate by the name of Jarrett Ardoin that they had killed Tasha to get rid of evidence. They also sexually assaulted her 2 times and stole her $80. As the investigations continued, the police searched Dwight's apartment and found a .380 caliber handgun and a box of bullets that matched the ones found at the scene. They also discovered that the gun was bought the morning of the murder from a local pawn shop. At the end of July 2005, officials at the Northwest Louisiana Crime Lab were able to positively identify the charred body found in the Nissan rental car as the remains of Tasha Lampkin using her DNA and dental records. It was confirmed that she was alive while the car was set ablaze, and her official cause of death was ruled as asphyxiation. The two suspects were given separate court dates, and in April of 2008, Davis was the first to go on trial. He pleaded not guilty, and throughout the proceedings, his defense team attempted to argue that he was merely an unwilling participant in the events that had led to Tasha's brutal murder. The prosecution, meanwhile, argued that Davis was involved in each stage of the crime and said that he was equally responsible. Brandon Davis' former inmate, Jarrett Ardoin, testified against him in the court of law. Jarrett stated that Brandon admitted to sexually assaulting Tasha with Dwight at separate locations before going to the place of her death. On April 25, 2008, Brandon Davis was found guilty of capital murder, which meant the jury was tasked with choosing between life in prison or the death penalty. Brandon's family stated that they were heartbroken by what had happened, but the death penalty would not bring Tosha back. The defense team added that he was physically abused by his father as a child, which greatly influenced his path into a life of crime. On April 28th, Brandon Davis was given life in prison without the possibility of parole after a deadlocked jury could not unanimously decide in favor of the death penalty. After Brandon's sentencing, Dwight Bacon accepted a plea deal from the prosecution to plead guilty to second-degree murder and spare him the death penalty. Dwight, too, was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Brandon attempted to appeal the decision in 2009, but it was still affirmed. Both men are currently still serving their sentences in Louisiana State Prison.